My name is Sloan Whitaker. I just turned 60, and I have spent my life navigating details most people overlook. Tonight, I was meant to celebrate not just my birthday, but decades of work family and carefully curated friendships. The Manhattan Penthouse glowed with warm light, the skyline stretching beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, and yet I felt a tight knot in my stomach I couldn't shake. Guests laughed, clinking glasses, but something felt off. My husband, Cody, lingered near the far corner, avoiding my gaze as he spoke to one of my cousins. I caught him glance toward the stairwell where I'd spotted Jenna, my secretary, slipping quietly into the room just moments ago. The way he straightened his tie and cleared his throat suggested effort I didn't remember seeing from him in years. Even my in-laws seemed on edge. Whispers paused whenever I glanced their way, eyes darting to Cody, then away, then back to their drinks. Eleanor's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and William's hand lingered over the stem of his glass like he was bracing for something. My mind ticked through every small inconsistency I had noticed. In the past months, the late client calls, the unexplained weekend trips, the unusually protective texts from family about my schedule. I forced a toast glass trembling in my hand and smiled at the faces around me. The laughter and chatter felt hollow, like a perfectly polished mask concealing something beneath. I knew tonight would mark a shift, though I didn't yet know how or just how deep the currents of deceit ran. And yet, even as I scanned the room one last time, the uneasy feeling in my chest told me I wasn't imagining it. The chatter from the birthday party still lingered in my mind, even as I retreated to the quiet of my Brooklyn apartment the next morning. I poured myself a cup of coffee and let my thoughts drift, retracing the small, unsettling details I had been brushing aside for months. There were the late-night calls Cody claimed were client emergencies that never appeared on any calendar. The weekend he claimed to be at a work retreat, when I later discovered his LinkedIn activity showed him commenting on posts from Jenna's profile. I remembered last Thursday when I had stopped by the office unexpectedly and noticed him hastily closing a video call. Jenna's name had flashed on the screen before it vanished. The way his eyes flicked to mine, too quick, too calculated, had set off an uneasy alarm that had lodged in my chest ever since. Then there were the coincidences that now seemed too deliberate to ignore. Family gatherings that conveniently overlapped with my audit trips so that someone could monitor my schedule. Eleanor's pointed questions about whether I would be late, William's casual reminders to keep the team updated, even Cody's sister Patricia asking with far too much concern whether I had noticed certain files at work. At the time, I had accepted them as simple politeness or curiosity, but now they were pieces of a pattern forming before my eyes. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness match the taste of unease on my tongue. These weren't random small missteps. They were part of something larger, threaded together by subtle timing and intent. Each anomaly stacked against the other, revealing a picture I had tried so hard to ignore. My mind went over the family's behavior during the party. The laughter, the whispers, the quick glances, they weren't just nervousness. They were protective, as if shielding Cody from scrutiny. My unease hardened into frustration, the sense of betrayal sharpening with each recollection. I realized with an almost painful clarity that I had been the only one unaware of the true orchestration behind the smiles, toasts, and polite congratulations. And yet, the deeper the picture grew in my mind, the more urgent it became to understand the full scope of what had been hidden. I couldn't let the pieces remain disconnected. I needed to trace every thread, every omission, every carefully timed interaction. The day after the party, I spent hours scrolling through old messages, emails, and calendar entries, piecing together a timeline that had long eluded me. Patterns leapt out, small anomalies that in isolation I had dismissed as coincidence. But now they formed a map of deception. Cody's lunch meetings always coincided with my compliance reviews. Jenna's visits matched the gaps in his reported travel. My husband hadn't just been dishonest, he'd been guided, perhaps even coached by those I trusted most. I remembered snippets of conversations from the party Eleanor whispering to Patricia about handling things delicately. William offering a too-quick excuse whenever I asked about Cody's schedule. Even minor remarks during my birthday toast now stung with hidden meaning. The more I analyzed, the more it became clear my family hadn't merely overlooked the affair. They had orchestrated an environment where it could continue undetected. In the late afternoon, I replayed a brief exchange I had overheard months ago in the kitchen, while Eleanor and Patricia thought I was on a conference call. They had mentioned Cody's networking needs and how certain boundaries needed to be maintained, words that had seemed innocuous at the time. Now, in the light of evidence, I understood exactly what they meant. They weren't protecting him. They were complicit, helping him exploit both my trust and his professional advantage. A sharp anger settled in my chest, mingled with disbelief. Betrayal by a spouse is devastating, but betrayal by one's own family felt almost unbearable. They had chosen strategy over empathy, secrecy over honesty. For the first time, I recognized the full extent of the conspiracy. The man I had shared a life with, and the people I had called family, were actively working together to undermine me. I sat back, letting the weight of the truth sink in. The threads of deception were tangled, intricate, and deliberate, and I would need to follow each one to its end. The morning sunlight spilled across my Brooklyn apartment, but it did little to lighten the storm brewing in my mind. I spread my laptop folders and printed emails across the dining table, turning my living room into a war room. Every message Cody had sent, every calendar conflict, every flagged expense report was meticulously organized. I traced patterns, lunches billed as client meetings, dinners labeled as networking events, travel requests that conveniently aligned with Jenna's schedule. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that revealed not just infidelity, but deliberate, coordinated deception. My family had been complicit, carefully shielding him from scrutiny, while he wove his affair into the fabric of our lives. I photographed receipts, highlighted email threads, and copied calendar screenshots onto a secure drive. Even small details, a notification dismissed too quickly, a meeting canceled at the last minute, suddenly screamed volumes when seen in the broader context. By mid-afternoon, I had a plan. My birthday party would become the stage. I would not yell, I would not accuse blindly. I would present the evidence calmly, visibly, in front of everyone. Cody, his family, Jenna, and the guests who thought they were celebrating a milestone. The envelope on my desk, heavy with printed truths, would be my instrument of justice. Yet as I organized the documents, a part of me trembled. Could I maintain composure while exposing betrayal so deeply embedded in my life? Could I confront months of deceit without losing control, without letting rage or humiliation overpower the precision I relied upon? I reminded myself that anger alone would not dismantle the carefully constructed illusions around me. Clarity, preparation, and timing would be my allies. I rehearsed the sequence in my head, the arrival, the greeting, the envelope presented with a steady hand. My heart beat faster as I imagined Cody's expression, his family's shocked silence. This was not just about punishment. It was about reclaiming agency, asserting that I would not be sidelined in my own life. Hours later, I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. The evidence was complete, the plan in place, and the stage set. In a few hours, the carefully maintained facade of their world would collide with the truth I had painstakingly documented, and there would be no turning back. The penthouse was alive with soft jazz and the hum of conversation, the golden glow of chandeliers reflecting off crystal glasses. Guests moved between trays of hors d'oeuvres, oblivious to the storm that I carried in a manila envelope tucked beneath my arm. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor, each step measured, deliberate. Cody stood near the bar talking animatedly with my cousin Henry, his laughter too sharp, too rehearsed. I caught Jenna leaning against the doorway, sipping champagne with a practiced casualness that now seemed like defiance. I allowed my eyes to scan the room, noting the small details I had trained myself to notice over the past weeks. Eleanor's hand hovering near her face, William shifting in his chair with subtle tension, Patricia's designer clutch gripped too tightly in her lap. Everyone sensed something, but none could articulate it. Taking a deep breath, I approached Cody first. "Here," I said, extending the envelope toward him, my voice steady. He froze, eyes narrowing confusion and fear flickering across his face. Jenna's smile faltered as she followed my gaze to the envelope, then to Cody. The air thickened. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused midair. I let the silence stretch long enough for the weight of anticipation to press against the walls. Cody reached for the envelope, his hand trembling. "Sloan, wait, please." He stammered, panic breaking through the veneer of control he usually maintained. I ignored his pleading, watching as the color drained from his face. The family reacted instantly. Whispers escalated into murmurs of disbelief. Eleanor's lips pressed tight. William's hand clutched the edge of the table as if to steady himself. Patricia gasped audibly, eyes darting between her brother and me, realizing the culmination of months of orchestrated deception. I placed the envelope on the table between Cody and Jenna and stepped back, letting the evidence speak for itself. Receipts, emails, expense reports, calendar entries. They spilled across the surface, the truth exposed in bold clarity. Jenna's shoulders slumped, a mixture of guilt and panic flashing in her eyes. The crowd around us began to murmur murmurs, growing into shocked whispers as the implications sank in. Cody sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he reached for the first page. "Sloan, I." His voice cracked, a fragile plea for mercy, for understanding, for reprieve from the truth he had long tried to bury. Eleanor and William exchanged hurried glances, scrambling to salvage control, to explain, to deflect. But the facade had already fractured. Every carefully crafted excuse, every orchestrated lie collapsed under the weight of evidence. The room was still except for the rustle of paper and the sharp intake of breath from those who had once been my friends, my family witnesses to deceit, too long hidden. I remained calm, my pulse steady, beneath the rising chaos. Every eye in the room was fixed on the envelope on Cody, on the undeniable truth I had laid bare. For the first time in months, I felt the surge of control, the quiet satisfaction of justice poised in the palm of my hand. Tonight, nothing could undo what was revealed, and the world around me would never again view the Hawthorne family the same way. The room felt suspended in time, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Guests froze, mid-conversation, glasses dangling from fingers, murmurs trembling through the air like fragile threads. Cody sat slumped in his chair, the envelope still spread before him, eyes wide and uncomprehending. Jenna's posture, once casual, now sagged with guilt, her fingers twisting the stem of her champagne flute. Around them, my in-laws moved quickly, too quickly, attempting to reclaim some semblance of control. Eleanor whispered to William words sharp and clipped, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. Patricia, pale and shaking, fumbled with her phone, as though she could erase the evidence by simply calling someone. Every practiced smile, every carefully measured gesture from the past months dissolved under the weight of what had just been revealed. I remained still, a silent observer in the midst of chaos. My breathing was calm, my pulse steady even as shock radiated outward from the center of the room. It was mesmerizing to watch the carefully constructed narrative unravel, to see the cracks I had suspected for months widen into an undeniable chasm. Every glance, every stammered excuse, every whispered defense revealed the depth of their complicity. A few guests looked at me uncertainly, trying to gauge whether they had misread the moment, but the evidence was unambiguous. Whispers grew into hushed conversations, speculation rippling through the crowd. Some shifted uneasily, aware that proximity to this scandal could affect their social standing. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, piecing together the story that had been carefully hidden from them. Cody finally tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sloan, please." He reached toward me, but I did not flinch. I let the moment stretch the envelope between us, a barrier and a declaration all at once. Every lie, every betrayal, every carefully orchestrated deception was now laid bare, undeniable, and public. As the first hints of shock began to settle into whispered conversations and stunned silence, I realized that this night would ripple far beyond the walls of the penthouse. Social and professional consequences had already begun to take shape, and there was no turning back. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of catharsis, a quiet satisfaction that justice had finally found its stage. The morning after the confrontation, my phone began to buzz relentlessly. Messages from colleagues, lawyers, and even acquaintances I barely recognized filled the screen. I had delivered the envelope, but the real work was just beginning. With meticulous care, I sent copies of the evidence to the appropriate channels: corporate compliance, the SEC, and my attorney. Each attachment, carefully labeled, left no room for ambiguity. By midday, the first responses arrived. Compliance officers requested formal statements. SEC investigators confirmed receipt and outlined procedures for initiating a thorough review. I watched as the first dominoes began to fall. Cody's company accounts were frozen temporarily, while Jenna was suspended, pending an internal investigation. My husband's family scrambled to contain the damage, but the evidence was indisputable. Contracts, financial statements, and internal communications left no room for denial. At the penthouse, Eleanor called repeatedly, her tone oscillating between pleading and panicked rationalization. William attempted to negotiate, promising cooperation, yet his corporate connections could not shield him from the cascading repercussions. Patricia, already pale and exhausted, tried to reach out to friends and social contacts, but the ripple of scandal had already begun. I moved deliberately through the days that followed, documenting every interaction, every correspondence, every procedural step. Each phone call and email became part of a meticulous record. My goal was not vengeance, it was accountability. Every violation, every misappropriated expense, every orchestrated lie was logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Even as I observed the professional fallout, the board meetings, the suspension notices, and the cautious corporate apologies, I felt a quiet vindication. Justice was unfolding not in whispers or rumor, but through concrete action, through legal and financial mechanisms that ensured the betrayal and corruption would not go unchecked. And through it all, I remained calm, steadfast, fully aware that the work I had begun months ago, tracing patterns and gathering evidence, had now transformed the private act of betrayal into a reckoning that could not be ignored. The weeks following the legal and corporate actions felt like a slow, steady exhale. I spent mornings reviewing bank statements and retirement accounts, ensuring that every asset was accounted for and under my direct control. The brownstone in Brooklyn, once a space shared with Cody, was now fully mine, each room a reminder of independence, reclaimed, each lock a small victory over months of manipulation. Professionally, I returned to work with renewed focus. I requested a transfer to a different division within the firm, one where I could continue to exercise authority without reminders of past betrayals. Colleagues greeted me with genuine respect, unaware of the personal storm that had passed, and yet I felt the subtle shift in dynamics. For the first time in months, I walked the corridors without scanning for whispers or calculating every glance. My reputation, once shadowed by my husband's actions, was slowly being restored through the diligence of documented evidence and professional integrity. Evenings became my own again. I cooked dinner while listening to music that had been long neglected, letting myself savor the routine without intrusion. I reflected on the betrayal that had once felt all-encompassing, how a spouse and family could collude to manipulate both personal and professional life. But in the reflection, I found clarity. The lessons were undeniable. Trust must be earned, boundaries must be maintained, and the strength to act calmly in the face of deceit was invaluable. By reclaiming control over my finances, my home and my work, I realized that empowerment was not just about confronting others, it was about restoring my own agency. The fear, anger, and frustration of recent months had begun to subside, replaced by a measured confidence. Each decision I made now was deliberate, rooted in experience, and guided by the knowledge that my life no longer depended on the whims of those who had once betrayed me. And in that steady, deliberate reclaiming, I felt the first real sense of peace since the revelation of their deception. By September, I had transformed my Brooklyn corner unit into a modest office, the kind of space that felt alive with possibility rather than weighed down by betrayal. Garrison Compliance Consulting officially opened, and my first client, a small import business, arrived with documents sprawled across the conference table. I guided them through identifying vulnerabilities, implementing safeguards, and understanding how internal fraud could quietly erode their company. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, a boutique medical practice, a growing tech startup, and a local nonprofit sought my expertise. Each engagement reminded me that the work mattered not for prestige or revenge, but for the tangible impact it had on people who had built their lives with honesty and trust. I felt purpose in a way I hadn't in years. Sitting at my desk, I thought back to the months of meticulous evidence gathering, the confrontation at the Penthouse, and the legal battles that followed. What had started as a response to betrayal had evolved into something larger, a mission to protect others from the same manipulation and deceit I had endured. The satisfaction of making a difference, of helping someone retain control over their life and livelihood, was profound. I realized that my life's value was never dependent on Cody, his family, or the chaos they had caused. I had reclaimed autonomy, rebuilt trust in myself, and discovered a sense of fulfillment that went far beyond any satisfaction revenge could provide. The sun rose over Brooklyn, spilling golden light across the brownstone where I had rebuilt not just a home, but a life. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the city wake. The skyline, jagged and alive, reflected a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Each building seemed to affirm that resilience could withstand even the deepest betrayal. I thought back over the past year, the confrontation, the evidence meticulously gathered, the legal battles, and the careful reclaiming of my independence. Each challenge had been a test of patience, intelligence, and strength. I realized how much I had underestimated my own capacity to endure and act decisively when the stakes were highest. From the apartment below, the sounds of children and street vendors carried into the morning, grounding me in the ordinary rhythms of life I had nearly lost. My consulting work flourished, giving me purpose and connection beyond the shadow of the past. I had turned the chaos into clarity, the pain into empowerment, and the betrayal into lessons I would carry forever. I sipped my coffee and allowed myself a quiet smile. The past was accounted for, the truth exposed, and the future entirely mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully aligned with my own life, independent, confident, and ready to meet whatever came next on my own terms.